The town of Oil City, Pennsylvania, sat nestled in the quiet valley of Venango County, where rivers curved like veins of steel, and streets carried the memory of the nation's oil boom. By the 1990s, the refineries had slowed. Jobs were fewer, and the town had settled into something smaller, something more intimate. The kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where neighbors waved as they passed, and where parents believed their children could ride bikes down the block without fear. But on one October evening in 1992, that trust was shattered. A single act of cruelty ripped through the fabric of a small community, casting a shadow that would not lift more than a decade. Shauna Howe was 11 years old, a sixth grader with brown hair, bright eyes, and a shyness that quickly melted once you heard her laugh. To those who loved her, she was radiant. To her mother, she was a heartbeat of the house. To her teachers, she was a girl who worked hard, who had begun finding her footing in the world that often feels overwhelming at that age. She loved to draw and color, notebooks and with doodles. To ride her bike around a block, she was small but spirited, the kind of child who still believed in magic of Halloween, who still felt the thrill of dressing up in costumes and walking house to house with friends. And in Oil City, where violent crime was nearly unheard of, there were no reasons to believe that Halloween 1992 would be any different. Parents had no reason to suspect that this year, that very night, their children's laughter would be cut short. Shauna had chosen to walk home from a Girl Scout Halloween party. She was dressed in a cat costume, simple, homemade, with black ears perched on her head. She was only a few blocks from safety. As she made her way down West First Street, street lamps flickered, their light stretched long shadows across the pavement. It was around 8 p.m. when a witness saw a car pull up alongside her. A man got out, voices were raised, then she screamed, and then silence. One neighbor later recalled seeing Shauna pushed into a vehicle, her small frame shadowed by the night. It happened in seconds, and she was gone. The entire neighborhood was unaware that a child just had vanished. Trick-or-treaters still roamed the sidewalks, parents still laughing on the porches, unaware that beneath the hum of the Halloween lay something terrible. When her mother realized Shauna hadn't returned, panic set in almost instantly. This wasn't a child who wandered. This was a child who lingered without calling. Police were contacted quickly, and Oil City responded. Neighbors left their porches, flashlight in hand. Police car began rolling through the streets, headlights bouncing against rows of houses. Shauna's name echoed through the night as dozens, then hundreds of voices calling into the cold, "Shauna, Shauna." The sound of a dog barking sharply interrupts the quiet. Music shifts to a low pushing drum, mimicking the heartbeat of search itself. The search lasted hours, days. Posters went up across town. Oil City had never known such fear. Parents who once waved at their children outside now kept them close. School attendance dropped. The innocence of a small Pennsylvania town had been stolen, and the streets felt empty. Before the discovery, the Howe family was brought into a station. Police explained they believed Shauna had been abducted. For mother, it was a moment of collapse. Her breath coming shallow. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. Nothing would come out. Her family rallied around her, but Oil City felt it too. News spread house to house. Whispers across dinner counters, carried in hushed voices at Sunday services. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers kept close eye in the front yards. Three days later, October 30th, the searchers found themselves near Coulter's Hole, a rocky wooded area outside of town. A team scoured the banks of creeks, calling out for Shauna's name. Leaves crushed underfoot. The air was brittle and cold. Then silence. One searcher noticed something caught in a brush near a culvert. A glimpse of fabric, a child's shoe, and then her small body, discarded, stripped of life she once carried. The scene froze in time. Men turned away, unable to hide their tears. Women covered their mouths. Officers stood silent. The radio was quiet, as if the enormity of the moment demanded reverence. The nightmare was real. Shauna was gone. Oil City was no longer a quiet town. It became a crime scene, and every porch, every shadow, every neighbor's story was suddenly led. Investigators canvassed the area, questioning anyone who had seen Shauna that night. Early witnesses recalled a small red car. Others spoke of two men lingering where they didn't belong. Police gathered cigarette butts, tire impressions, even footprints pressed into damp soil. Fragments of a puzzle, but the image remained elusive. The community demanded answers. Town meetings filled with anxious faces. Police reassured parents that the case was priority, but weeks stretched into months, then years, and still no arrest. Each Halloween after 1992 was cloaked in dread. Children were kept home, porch light went dark, the laughter trick-or-treaters were replaced by silence. What haunted everyone most was the brutality of it. This wasn't a random disappearance. That ended with no trace. There was a child still murdered and left in the woods. That meant someone in or near Oil City had carried out the crime and lived among them as though nothing had happened. Over a decade, the investigation simmered. Shauna's case went cold, but never closed. Then, in the early 2000s, advances in forensic technology reopened the file. Evidence collected years before, fibers on DNA samples, was retested from her costume. Science had sharper eyes. It pointed to brothers, James and Timothy O'Brien, names known to the town. Men who once blended in, and suddenly the shadows that had loomed over Oil City 12 long years began to take shape.
You walk up to her, and as you're approaching her, you ask her what?
She was selling Girl Scout.
Okay, and why do you ask her that?
Because I like the word Girl Scout.
Right, I know that, but
Just make her feel at ease.
make her feel at ease. Then what do?
Well, I grab a hold of her and take on
Did
action.
you grab her and hug her?
In 2004, the long-standing silence broke. Detectives moved in on James and Timothy O'Brien, along with an accomplice, Ted Walker. The brothers had been whispered for years, troublemakers since the teens. Their names always circled when police talked about crimes in the county. But now, the DNA evidence finally in place, whispers became handcuffs. When the news spread that the arrest had been made, Oil City held its breath. Crowds gathered outside the courtroom, some shouting for justice. Others simply stared at the men accused of stealing a child's life. These weren't teenagers. These weren't strangers. They were familiar faces. That was the horror. The killer had always been among them all this time. Ted Walker eventually admitted to his role, that Shauna was abducted under the brothers' orders, that he had been complicit in what happened next. His cooperation solidified the case. For the Howe family, it was both relief and torment. They finally had names, but no explanation that ever could make sense of the violence. The O'Brien brothers were charged with secondary murder, kidnapping, and criminal conspiracy. The courtroom became the stage where 12 years of grief, silence, suspicion finally erupted into testimony. Families filled the benches, reporters lined the back wall, and in the center, Shauna's mother. Her hands trembled, but her eyes fixed forward. The prosecution laid out and built the case on fragments, formed an undeniable picture of O'Brien brothers had orchestrated the abduction and murder of Shauna. Forensic analysis tied their DNA to the crime. Witnesses placed them near the scene, and Ted Walker, facing his own reckoning, took the stand to testify against them. Jurors listened as the final hours of Shauna's life were recounted. The abduction, the terror, the final drop from the railroad trestle, where her small body had been discarded. The details were devastating, but they were necessary. Without them, justice would have not been secured. Defense attorney tried to sway the jury, of course, painting the brothers as the scapegoats, questioning the reliability of the forensic evidence, and casting doubts on Walker's credibility. But the jury saw through that, the consistency in the story, the science that underpinned it, and the unmistakable thread of guilt woven through O'Brien's past behaviors. Inside the court, tension was constant. Neighbors sat shoulder to shoulder with family, facing etched with both anger and sorrow at the same time. Some cried quietly, others stared boldly at the defendants, as if willing them to feel even a fraction of pain that they had caused. Shauna's mother, she just sat rigid, her presence and silence testimony of love and loss. Every word spoken in that courtroom was another cut into her heart. Yet she stayed, because this time she wanted to see justice through the end. As the trial stretched on, the question wasn't whether O'Briens were guilty. The question was what justice would look like for Shauna. The jury decision arrived like a storm rolling across Oil City, heavy and impossible to ignore. James and Timothy O'Brien were found guilty of second-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Their punishment? Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Inside the courtroom, a hush fell as the words sank in. Shauna's mother, rigid in her chair, her breast shallow, her hands twisted together. When the sentence was read, she closed her eyes. Around her, supporters wept openly, some in relief, others in rage, and then nothing could ever bring back Shauna. The O'Brien brothers showed little emotion. James sat stone-faced, his eyes darted occasionally toward the floor. Timothy leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, as though daring the room to break under a weight of his stare. Neither brothers apologized, neither offered remorse. Their silence was louder than words. For the Howe family, justice had been delivered, but it was hollow kind of justice.
Myself every day. I'm her mom. I should have been there to protect her, and I wasn't. How can you not blame yourself? I wasn't there when Shauna needed me, and needed me the most in her life.
Shauna was still gone, her childhood stolen, her future erased. No sentence, no verdict, no prison walls could ever balance the scales of what had been done and what she had lost. And yet, as the gravel came down, the final time, the community outside the court exhaled as one. After 12 years of fear and silence, Shauna's story had been heard. Her killers had been named. When the courtroom emptied, news cameras packed up, Shauna's mother was something far heavier than the silence of an empty hallway. Justice had been spoken, but it hadn't healed her. She returned home, the faint echo of a little girl's laugh still woven into the air, and the years spent chasing answers that always seemed to just be out of reach. And she thought of the trial, where every testimony dragged her back into the darkest hours of her life. In the years that followed, Oil City carried the weight of Shauna's memory. Her name became etched into a collective conscience of the town, not just as a child whose life was stolen, but as the reason no child in the community would walk the same dark streets without protection. Halloween in Oil City was forever changed. For more than 1 decade, trick-or-treating was canceled altogether. Porch lights stayed off, costumes stayed in the closet, and eerie silence took the place of children's laughter. Parents told their children why. They told them Shauna's story, passing it down as both warning and remembrance. When trick-or-treating finally returned, it did so under a heavy watch. Police patrolled doubles, neighbors stood watching the corners, and though candy once again passed the bowls from the bucket, no one forgot the little girl who had been taken on Halloween in 1992. Shauna's memory lived in other ways too. Candlelight vigils were held on anniversaries of her disappearance. Community events honored her life, and even decades later her story was told to new generations, not to frighten, but to remind everyone that vigilance, love, and remembrance can turn tragedy into a promise. Never again here, never again to one of ours.
A lot of love, a lot of concern, a lot of friends, people I haven't even met, people I don't know, but they all remember Shauna. So maybe this happening to Shauna did something for the community to pull them together that may not have happened.
Shauna Howe's life was short, but her impact would shape the entire town's sense of safety. Her story became a call to protect the vulnerable. For Oil City, she would never just be a victim. She would always be a daughter, a classmate, a friend, and the child who memory demanded change. The story of Shauna is not just a tragedy from the past. It is a scar that still marks Oil City, a reminder how quickly innocence can be shattered, and how community can still come together in the aftermath of the unthinkable loss. We've walked through the quiet streets where Shauna once laughed, through the anguished hours of her disappearance, and into the cold courtroom where her killers were finally named, and the private silence of a mother's grief. But as we tell these stories and cases, we hold fast to the evidence, to the fact that remains, because even in the darkest stories, it's the truth, however painful, that carries us forward. The story of Shauna Howe is not just a tragedy from the past. It is a scar that makes a reminder of how quickly innocence can be shattered and how a community can come together in the aftermath of the unthinkable loss. And if you'd like to see more of these cases covered with care and respect, don't forget to subscribe to When Darkness Falls, because we do care, so please stay aware. The next case is already calling us. Bye for now.